Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stolyarov II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon of February 4th, 2024. Today, we will have a fascinating conversation in store for you about biohacking and the upcoming Biohacker Expo, which will be held in Miami, Florida on February 23rd through the 25th. Joining us is our panel of U.S. Transhumanist Party officers, including our Director of Visual Art, Art Ramon Garcia, our Director of Scholarship, Dan Elton, our Legislative Director, Jason Geringer, and our 2024 U.S. Vice Presidential Candidate and Director of Citizen and Community Science, Daniel Tweed. And our special guest today is Sandy Martin, the founder of Biohacker Expo, who will tell us all about it today, and who will also share her story, how she became interested in biohacking and her outlook on what is a fascinating and growing field. So, Sandy, welcome. Please tell us about yourself and about the Biohacker Expo as well.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Such an interesting group of people to address. I think there's a lot of overlap between transhumanism and biohacking. And there seems to be an emphasis on science and technology, advancements for health and longevity. And I think that perhaps the transhumanists spend a little more time on the philosophical ramifications. I personally got involved because I had a brain injury that I didn't know how to address. And I started to adjust my diet, my supplements. I got an oxygen chamber. I started to do things in response to this brain injury to get better, but my health kept declining and I didn't know what was going on. It took 6 months to figure out that I had mold in my brain. And if it wasn't for Dave Asprey, I wouldn't have figured it out. And when he told his story about mold, I was able to recognize some of the patterns that he was describing. And then I got tested, found out that's what it was, realized that some of the things I was trying were actually working against me. And so adjusted my protocol in order to heal, which I did over the course of the following year. And it took a full year and a half once I got diagnosed to get back into the swing of things where I could work again, like really be productive and healthy. But I'm grateful for that. I ran events for 15 years. I ran Comic Cons, maybe some sci-fi nerds in the crowd. And those are my people. So I feel at home if that's among the audience here. And I've taken the skills that I've learned from running 50,000 person attendees to a health expo. And I look forward to getting into a little bit of a debate with people in terms of what biohacking is and why it's a thing. And looking forward to a lively conversation.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sandy. So the Biohacker Expo can be accessed online at biohackerexpo.com. That is where people can purchase tickets for February 23rd to the 25th. Can you tell us a bit about the format of the expo, as well as some of the speakers you're looking forward to, some of the aspects of biohacking that will be represented there?
Well, I think that it's challenging to say who's more popular at this point among my audience. Gary Brecka, who just launched a podcast, The Ultimate Human, who's the most searched biohacker on Google right now, or William Shatner, who it just embodies a life well lived. He'll be 93 on March 22nd. And so a month before his 93rd birthday, he'll be at Biohacker Expo to talk about what it means to live a long, fulfilling life and what it means to live long and prosper. And then we've got some other experts. My favorite of all of them is Chris Palmer from Harvard Medical School. He's been on the podcast circuit for about 1.5 years to promote brain energy, and his link between metabolic health and brain health, mental health, is life-changing for me personally. And that's a message that I'm thrilled to bring to people. There's all kinds of speakers and exhibitors who are demonstrating novel approaches to feeling better. Ultimately, biohacking is about feeling better because, I mean, why would you do it if you felt great? If you felt great, just go about your life and don't worry about anything else. But people who experience pain, depression, if they suffer from anything, really, I want people to know that there are things they could do to feel better.
Yes, thank you, Sandy. And I think a lot of people would be quite interested in that. I think most people do experience some sort of suboptimality in their health or their day-to-day perceptions, sensations of the world. I often like to say, I don't know of anybody over the age of 30 who doesn't have some sort of serious long-term health condition. And it may not be something that will kill them tomorrow or next week or next decade, but it is something that requires them to live their lives differently from how they would have otherwise lived them. And if those people can get some sort of alleviation of that condition, that would definitely improve quality of life. Ultimately, it could improve length of life as well. So we have now joining us Zack Varkaris, who will be one of the speakers at the Biohacker Expo. So welcome, Zack. And since you're going to be presenting at the Biohacker Expo, and you've also presented twice at our virtual Enlightenment Salons, what would attendees of your presentation be able to expect and look forward to?
Hi, Gennady. Hi, Sandy. Hi, everyone else. Yes, what would they expect? Well, the usual stuff: fertility, fitness, ovarian rejuvenation. Obviously, we're going to expand heavily on our talk with regard to emotional health, because everyone talks about mental health, but we talk about Freud and Spanner, obviously. So we're going to develop that a lot more. I will lose the tash by then. I'm just sort of getting a bit mountain folk with the mountains and the snow up here. The long and the short of it is that's what we'll do. But I actually have a question for you, Sandy, because if it's okay. I've seen the list of people, and some of them are amazing and really cool. I actually would like some of them I really want to meet. But why have you got Captain Kirk, Bill Shatner, William Shatner on the? Why him? I don't understand that.
So, in addition to him embodying what it means to live long and prosper, because I believe that he does, I think that it's exactly.
But isn't that Spock? Isn't that Spock? Live long and prosper.
It is, but it's the Star Trek ethos.
Oh, right. Okay.
And I think it's important to connect people's aspirations to their own lives. And so in the Comic-Con business, I've seen people be celebrity obsessed. And I want to take that and direct it back towards themselves. If seeing, normally when people go to see William Shatner, it's Star Trek related, it's Comic-Con related, it's something nostalgic, which is wonderful and beautiful, and it connects people to a sense of joy within themselves. But I want to take that and I want them to realize that there's more, and that he has lived and accomplished. I mean, from a space traveling icon on TV to actually going to the edge of the atmosphere himself at 90, that's something that people can then look at and say, oh, well, perhaps I could do a little more. If Mr. Shatner can do it, then maybe I can do it. And that's what I'm hoping to do. And I also hope to connect this fan base that is, a lot of what Star Trek featured kind of came true. I mean, the flip phones and so many technologies that they fictionally portrayed.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's just that the techno nerds made things to look like they did on Star Trek, or if it's because it was inevitable. But in either case, science fiction is emerging as science fact as we grow and evolve and push boundaries. And so I think people who love science fiction are likely to love what it can do for them personally. And I think that William Shatner embodies that as well.
Right. I see. Oh, that's interesting. I mean, I like to say that when we can't explain something, it's magic, and when we can, we call it science. It's one of my sort of, lines. And with regard to, thank you for having me at Biohacker, and I'm looking forward to it. I actually spoke to one of the other speakers this morning, who's based in the UK, who's coming over about that. And one of the things is that I think you're very right that we're going to show people ways that they can improve their quality of life without spending a fortune. That's basically what it's going to be. And there, obviously, yes, there's layers. So it's a bit like going on an airplane. You're all on the same airplane. Some people are going coach, and some people are going business, and some people are going first. But we're all flying that direction, and you're all still you can still choose whatever you can within the budget you have. And that's what we're going to be about. Very much Austin Bytech at that talk, and writing it at the moment. But I'm interested to meet William Shatner. I want to know, is he really as bad as they portray him in the movies? Is he that much of a prima donna, or is he quite cool? I don't know. But
he's quite cool, but he's also a 92-year-old man. And
right.
If you were to have thousands of people pulling on your attention in a day, it would be challenging to stay on.
Right.
And so I think sometimes people don't recognize the toll it takes to be present for thousands of people in a day, which he does every single weekend at Comic-Cons all across the country.
Right. Okay.
Yes. And at 92, that is impressive to be able to maintain that kind of schedule. He definitely looks younger than 92. Yeah. I have seen him speak twice in person, and I would have thought, without knowing his true age, that he looked like a man in his 70s. So there is either an element of genetic luck or some set of lifestyle approaches that he has practiced that have helped him to maintain relative youthfulness. Now, speaking of science fiction, John H. writes that there are very few people who are not science fiction nerds in the audience. Indeed, one of our viewers is Alan Crowley. He is one of our regular attendees, whose handle is Sci-Fi by Alan Crowley. So that handle answers your question, Sandy. And Daniel Tweed writes, our movement is indeed one of wellness and well-being. I hope we will continue to communicate that better and better. And yet, despite our focus on wellness, John H. writes, wait until you're 70 when suboptimal equals normal. So for many people, that is just the day-to-day state of affairs, and they have, to some extent, become reconciled with that out of necessity because they don't feel like there's anything they can do. Now, in terms of your experience, as well as your awareness of the biohacking field, what do you think people can realistically do today? And what do you think is on the horizon in terms of quality of life as well as potentially length of life? Do you think most people today can be like William Shatner in their early 90s?
I think they can if they want to. And I see a lot of variance in that in the people that I talk to. When I talk about life extension, the general public is, I posted in a group on Facebook. The title of the group is Gen X Women Are Sick of Your Shit. And in that group, I asked if, who would want to extend their fertility for the purpose of longevity, which is something that Zack is passionate about. And out of about 20 responses I got, 2 were curious, and the rest were like, no way. Do not do anything that puts me in jeopardy of being hormonal or the risk of having kids. And that's women who were roughly 45 to 55 in that group. And I think that's because people are already suffering. And, you know, in my own case, when my brain started to fail me, I was undergoing a great deal of stress, and I was at an age where people would have considered me perimenopausal. And it would be to the comment made before about where 70 suboptimal is normal. Having brain fog at 45 as a woman is considered normal by society. My first symptom was depression. But everything in my life, I loved the stress I was under. So I had a positive orientation towards my stress. I was overwhelmed for sure, but I had good feelings about it. But I was depressed and fatigued. And that brain fog came on top of it. And I just knew it wasn't me. But we're so quick to say it's all in our heads. We're so quick to call it normal. And that to me is what biohacking is really about. It's about the freedom to look at it differently. Because it doesn't matter what you do, whether it's adjusting your diet, your supplements, your light exposure, your sound exposure, your fitness activities. It doesn't really matter if you don't have the discernment to say, you know, this is not normal for me, and I don't accept these suboptimal feelings, and I'm going to do something to feel good again. And I think that William Shatner has an orientation towards ignoring pain. And so he's got shoulder pain and hip pain, and he kind of hobbles when he walks, but he doesn't think about it. And by not putting his mind on the pain, he's able to keep going. And that desire to move forward is probably the most effective form of life extension there is.
Yes, that's quite an interesting observation. And our friend Rudy Hoffman writes that unfortunately Spock, that is Leonard Nimoy, is dead permanently, but Shatner is still alive, and he is the embodiment of the Star Trek ethos. So indeed, he continues to essentially break new ground for a person of his age, and he continues to be intellectually active. He continues to have a sense of meaning and purpose in his life and persevere despite difficulties. It's interesting because I had an experience over the past year, really between August 2022 and August 2023, when I had long COVID, and I essentially worked my way out of that condition through the equivalent of graded exercise therapy, except I did it on my own, essentially by monitoring my heart rate when I was doing exercises, especially running, and targeting certain heart rates while I was running until I worked my way back up to my pre-COVID pace. And there are no medically accepted treatments for long COVID that would be cures, but I suspect that a lot of the symptoms have to do with an autonomic nervous system dysfunction, and the autonomic nervous system can be re-regulated through essentially habits of lifestyle that gradually bring one back to the pre-COVID condition and the body treating that as normal. But it takes a certain effort of will, it takes perseverance, and it's not even a linear progression. Sometimes there can be setbacks, there can be periods of time when one experiences, let's say, a worsening of the symptoms, but one still has to persist through it. So there are some people who seem to believe that the only safe practices for health improvement are those that are under the supervision of a medical doctor. And we even have a comment from our friend Mike Lazine, who says he's not for biohacking unless it's done by certified doctors. And he mentions fields like cybernetics, but he says he would never biohack himself. But maybe there's a different understanding of what biohacking means by someone like Mike Lazine as compared to how you articulated it. So, how would you respond to that kind of outlook?
Well, I have so many questions for Mike, and so I don't know if he'll be able to respond in the chat, but um, I, my regular doctor spends 15 minutes with me at most and schedules this a small segment of tests once a year if I ask. And so what does he mean by doctors and doctors supervising? Because I'm not finding a lot of that in society. I'm finding that even to get to the right doctor, you have to push and beg to get to somebody. Like if you have a thyroid issue, your GP is not going to help you with that. And you have to go to a special endocrinologist to get the special test. Those appointments could take 3 months, 6 months to get. And so what's happening in the body in the period of time that it takes our healthcare system to permit us to get these things? And then, you know, how often do they allow you to test? So I go to a place in Fort Lauderdale called Liquivita. They test all my hormones, all my nutrient levels, all of my growth factors and hemoglobin levels. And it's 18 pages of test results. And I pay $100 and I run the rest on my insurance. It's up to me to decide that I'm going to get that kind of feedback. And then they have doctors on staff who can help me interpret it because I can't interpret all that on my own. But I think for me, biohacking is about making the decision to go get the right information. And there are startups now that will, for $500 a year, like Function Health, for $500 a year, they'll test certain things twice a year, certain things every quarter. There's a supplement company called Bionic that will test you periodically throughout the year and adjust your supplements based on how you test. The idea that you would be taking supplements because an influencer recommends it is absurd. And in that, I'm sure Mike and I agree. But if we have the tools to find out what our bodies are deficient in, and your doctor's not going to run that test. And so go get the test. And if you're more comfortable with your doctor's interpretation, take it to him. But I bet you he doesn't know enough about nutrition to give an intelligent answer because it just wasn't taught in medical school.
May I add in, just type something in there? Because obviously this is something I'm part of. I'm one of those companies that offers, you know, or our team offers things related to fertility and longevity and biohacking. I mean, biohacking, the name itself is never, it doesn't sound very good, does it? I mean, you're
Right.
hacking away. But in terms of biohacking, the way I view it is you have a right in your, especially in this country or in the first world, mostly in the North American continent, you have a right to do with your body what you want. So if you're dying on the bed, you don't have to take the medicine they give you, but we blindly follow a doctor. Now, I'm not saying doctors are bad. They're not. They're brilliant. But the thing is, they have rules and regulations they fit, and one size does not fit all. That's just the reality. And even it's a few sizes fit, you know, most of the population, but it's still a few sizes. So we've had, and I can't go into details, but we've had one or two of our candidates or patients who had Lyme's disease. And ironically, the same doctor that was for one of these people was the same doctor that my daughter had. For Lyme disease. Now, he was supposed to be a world-leading expert. I'm not going to say names or anything like that, but he wasn't. He isn't. And when this person came to us, I said, well, actually, you should look at this, this, and this. And we had a team of scientists working on it. And lo and behold, it worked. Now, it's not because that doctor's bad. It's because he has rules and he has to do certain things a certain way, which I respect and you have to do. You can't just go, oh, well, let's just take this pill and see what happens. But very often, with biohacking and things like that, it's understanding, it's know thyself, number one, be willing to address thyself, number two, and then be able to seek advice. And then there's the big one, which is caveat emptor, buyer beware. You have to decide which one you want to take from that. But that's very important. And I think that now what we're realizing is that you're bound by so many rules and regulations that it's up to you to make the decision. Who said freedom was easy? It's not. You have to have the choice, and that's the choice. So I think giving people those options is the biggest key. And again, without meaning to sound denigrating of the influencer scenario, a lot of influencers say, oh, I tried this and I did that and it was great. But what we do with our patients is they do a full genetic test, they do a full gut biome test, they do a full blood test, they do a full bone density test. And those four things, between how you analyze that, obviously we have the ability to analyze it, that gives you the ability to give you the next 15-year roadmap for the rest of your life, or for the next 15 years, rather, not the rest of your life. That's a short amount in the way we're terming, but seriously, the next stage. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just wanted to give you a heads up on how I feel.
Speaking of genetic tests, I just got my full genome sequenced, and one of the results showed that I have very little propensity to have good heart rate variability. And I found that really fascinating because it's been the one thing I've been trying to adjust since 2012, long before I had any concept of what biohacking is. And I've been working with a tool put out by HeartMath in order to measure my heart rate variability in a real-time setting. And so to me, part of biohacking is how you breathe. And I certainly don't need a doctor's supervision to breathe 5 seconds in and 5 seconds out while considering an elevated emotion simultaneously. And so I would encourage everyone to broaden their perspective of what could be considered biohacking, because there's a lot of opportunity to alleviate suffering at any age.
Yes, and I think this seems to be the root of the difference with Mike Lezine, because the next question he posed was, explain what is biohacking, what does it cover? Is it just people who do self-implants? And I think your answer would be a resounding no. Our friend Alan Crowley of the Sci-Fi by Alan Crowley handle wonders, how is biohacking different than physical augmentation? I think that would be a good question to answer, because it could shift the perspective of someone like Mike Lezine if it's communicated that biohacking isn't just implanting chips or magnets or other devices into yourself. There are other approaches to biohacking that could involve diet or lifestyle or supplements or exercise. So how would you characterize the differences between biohacking and physical augmentation?
Well, I think that the term biohacking, coined by Dave Asprey, who was an early tech entrepreneur in the early days of the internet. I think his first claim to fame was that he sold the first item through e-commerce ever sold. And so he had a hacking mentality, which involves getting into a machine and adjusting it in some way. And so when people hear the term hacking, it's natural that they would think of that. But I don't think Dave even believes that that's what biohacking is. And so it's not about adjusting the physical body with technology. It's about enhancing our physical and mental well-being through any means. And I think breath is the first thing, followed perhaps by light. I mean, one of the best things we can do is to get early morning light exposure and sunset light exposure in order to reset our circadian rhythms. The modern lifestyle has adjusted we're in a constant state of adaptation. And it creates all these forms of stress on our bodies, because we're not oriented to this blue light naturally. And so, wearing silly yellow or red glasses at night when you watch TV is a biohack. That's a way to adjust what's coming in so that you can sleep better. And I'm going to tell you, if I wear red glasses at night for an hour before bed, instead of staring at my screen, I get a half hour extra deep sleep. And that's through an Aura ring that I track my sleep with. And so I think that it's anything that can adjust the outcome of our physiology and our mental health. And it doesn't have to be like a device or a technique that gets in, right? Like it can be nutrition and air and light and sound.
Mhm. All right. So would you agree with this characterization, again from Alan Crowley? Is biohacking simply using one's body better?
Say it's using one's mind to help their bodies feel better.
All right.
I think that's a broad question. I don't think it's just the body. I think it's about well-being, and perhaps there's a leaning towards that being a physical reality. But I believe we've got an electromagnetic field that we can measure 3 feet around the body, and so I consider that as part of the world that I'm biohacking too.
Yes, and certainly one can have an interesting discussion about the mind-body connection and the extent to which the mind can influence the body, as well as what are the limitations of that. So that would be fascinating to explore. For instance, I do think there is a mind-body connection when it comes to recovery from long COVID. I am a lot more skeptical about whether that can help, say, recovery from cancer, because cancer is just a very, very aggressive physical phenomenon, and you need to kill it with some very aggressive techniques as well. So that may be a good conversation to get into, but now let's go to Dan Elton for his questions.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I have a couple comments actually. Sorry, my voice is a bit sore, but just recovering from a cold. But yeah, I feel like I should weigh in here a little bit too, because I had long COVID, which we've just actually, Gennady and I and a bunch of us have discussed on this show before. In my case was actually quite severe, where I essentially was incapacitated for, roughly 5 or 6 months. And I had to take time off from work, and took about a year to recover completely. But what I realized is that there are a lot of limitations to our current medical understanding and scientific understanding, especially when it comes to complex, multifaceted illnesses and being able to treat them, and also anything that involves the brain and the body connection. We just have a poor understanding of. So what I would, my kind of philosophy or advice would be always go to see a medical doctor first, because I strongly believe in evidence-based medicine and scientific approach, but also realize that they don't know everything. And also, like you said, they have very limited time to spend with you, and they're not going to be able to understand everything. So that's where I do see, now I've actually changed my thinking. And I do actually, I used to be like narrowly always thinking that everything had to be scientific evidence based, and now I've changed my thinking a little bit and realized that for a lot of cases, you run into the the limitation of current mainstream medical knowledge. And in that case, it actually makes sense to go and try different things, and other see a lot of different other types of experts, if that makes sense. So that's like how I would approach health in general. But anyway, my question was really, you mentioned that you had a mold exposure. You believe you had a mold exposure. I think that's really interesting. I was curious, what what you got from Dave Asprey, and if you could tell us a little bit more about your recovery and what kind of things you used to recover.
Sure. What my brain stopped processing sequences over the course of about 2 weeks. And I was alarmed and immediately went for a brain scan. I guess I immediately started watching YouTube videos trying to figure out why I didn't feel good. I encountered Dr. Amen, the Amen clinics, and then I went for a SPECT scan. I found someone in town who would do it. I shouldn't have done that. I should have flown to Atlanta. I should have gone to the Amen clinic. They didn't perform it properly, but they did capture in one of the slices of the scan what appeared to be a toxic pattern based on, I took Dr. Amen's brain coaching certification course in order to understand how to read my scans. I later learned that just the way they performed it, it made it look like I had bumped my head. And that was because they did it with my eyes closed. And they just didn't do it properly. But when they looked at the midsection of the brain and it wasn't affected by my eyes, it showed a toxic pattern, but I haven't lived a toxic lifestyle. Very rarely drank, didn't do drugs. There was no reason for that. And so I was puzzled, but I just filed it away. When I was listening to Dave's book, when he talked about how he figured out he had mold, I don't know if you guys know his story, but he used to be 350 pounds and dedicated his life to transforming his body so that he could be strong and healthy. Tried a bunch of things that didn't work before he figured out what did work for him. But part of that equation was to detox. And by talking to Amen, he found out that toxic pattern could have been caused by an environmental factor like mold. He got tested, found out he had it, and then he detoxed. Once I heard that, then I went for a urine test and found out I did have dangerous levels of mold in my body, and that the oxygen chamber was probably not the first thing I should have done, because when you hit mold too hard, too fast, it fights back. And my first doctor, speaking of mental health, I found a functional medicine doctor covered by my insurance, and I went to her. She's the one that gave me the mold test. She gave me this handout that said in all caps, "You must have mental health support to get through this." She gave me a drug that aggressively started to kill the mold. And I had suicidal feelings for the only 3 days of my life while I was on that drug. Mold fights back. And thankfully, I went to take that drug the next morning and I went, "Oh, you're new." And then didn't take it. And I talked to her later that day, my doctor. I talked to her later that day and she said, "I told you you'd need mental health support to get through this." And that's a load of crap. Because when you do something to the body that causes that kind of a reaction, it's not fair to put it on my emotional regulation when it's the drug causing the reaction. And so I stopped seeing her. I found another doctor who could take me through a slow, gentle process. There are all kinds of things that can help you detox mold: aloe vera, chia seeds, chlorella, activated charcoal, binders to hold on to it and pull it out of your body. But one of the best things I did was to go to sound baths. The vibrations from gongs, I know that it helped my peripheral nervous system. And I feel like it helped my brain too. I don't have a way to measure that for my brain, but I didn't have sensation in my toes because of the chronic inflammation that the mold caused. The symptoms are very similar to long COVID. Both are chronic inflammatory conditions. And so when I went to the doctor who really started to help me, he put a tuning fork on my toes and I couldn't feel it. And on my second sound bath, I could feel my toes again. And so I was really, really encouraged by the promise of some natural therapies because of that. I used microcurrent. I got a dog. My doctor told me not to exercise. And I thought that the good doctor told me not to exercise. It's like, how can you just not exercise? What, sitting all day is going to help me feel better? But I didn't have the energy to move, but I would do it for someone who needed me. And so I got a puppy, and he's wonderful, and he really helped me through it. There's the other thing that I think is really important, the neuro-linguistic programming. Have you guys heard of that?
Yes, this is particularly in relation to long COVID and Phil Parker and all of that.
Yeah. So my doctor explained the importance of that, explained how chemical sensitivities kind of go hand in hand with mold sensitivities. And it's probably, I would imagine, with long COVID too, because it's that chronic inflammation. And he said the number one thing I could do for myself to get better would be to not identify with my symptoms at all anymore. And I think he underestimated my willingness to go there, because on the next visit, when he asked me about my symptoms, I laughed. I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, "I need you to tell me what your week was like. What were your symptoms?" And I said, "You told me no symptoms. I don't have anything to report." And he's like, "Well, you must have had something that you observed." And I was like, "You told me no, and I took you seriously, and I don't have anything to report." And I think that's an important aspect of getting better. I think that's why Bill Shatner is doing so well at 92, because I think he doesn't identify with his symptoms.
Yes, the way I came to a similar conclusion, because the way I would think about it is that that essentially what I actually wrote a pretty long blog post about this, that your brain is constantly modeling what's going on in your body. And so what's been shown, like with chronic pain, about 50% of these patients with chronic back pain, when they do an MRI of their back, that it's perfectly normal, everything is healed. But because the brain still thinks there's something wrong, subconsciously it creates the pain. And so I think some of long COVID is something similar, where there's a subconscious system that is thinking you're still sick. And so it's generating the fatigue. Now, I want to be clear, not all of it. There's also like persistent virus, Epstein-Barr virus, like a lot of things going on with it. But I think in some cases, it's this brain issue essentially. And so and it's subconscious, but I think when you consciously focus on your symptoms, it kind of reinforces that whole system. That's my that's how I think about it. And so it's really interesting. And also, neuro-linguistic programming honestly is, in my opinion, a bit like pseudoscientific, honest. But it is interesting that there is actually a randomized controlled trial that showed that it helped teenagers with chronic fatigue syndrome. So there must be something to it. It's not all. I want to just tell our audience, because I know we have a lot of hardcore science people that probably listen, and some of this stuff might seem a little bit woo, but there is something to it, I would say. And it's really interesting listening to you list all the different things that you found helpful.
Well, to the hardcore science people, I would say that thoughts are electrical impulses. And the nature of the thoughts that we allow to course through our bodies affects our hormonal regulation and our stress response. And all of that is a very physical, measurable reality. Even starting with heart rate variability, thoughts of frustration cause an irregular pattern of heartbeats, and thoughts of gratitude and compassion create orderly heartbeats. And that, I think there's loads of science to demonstrate the power of the mind over the body in terms of breath, epigenetics, heart rate variability, etc.
Absolutely. It's sort of an emerging area, actually, which has been kind of neglected historically. With basically the mind body connection, and yeah, some of this is being researched now in like, functional neurological disorder and like pain reprocessing and different things. But yeah, it's super interesting. And the other thing I wanted to say, I guess, is before we go on to other people, is I like how you're broadening the term biohacking. I think in the transhumanist community, we traditionally we think of it sort of like kind of wild, like implants, but actually, I have seen it used in a pretty general way. Just to refer to different used, different alternative practices, or also just sort of trying different things to see what works for you. I think that is very underrated. There's a blog post I read about which talked about luck-based medicine, and there was a person who had a stomach condition or bowel condition, and what they determined was they just had to try. There was no doctor that had like the answer to it. They just had to try a lot of different things until they finally hit upon something that worked. And so I think for, that's like a form of biohacking, right? Is hacking, it's like when you don't like hacking, you don't always understand everything, but you find a way to solve the problem, right? And so I feel like that's like kind of the general ethos of biohacking is kind of just like figuring out something. Anyway, yeah.
I met someone who was a volunteer for a nonprofit organization that would capture videos of people who were terminally ill so that they could pass wisdom to their children. And what he commented on with respect to every single one of these interviews was that all of them at some point could recall a time where a doctor didn't take them seriously. And now they're terminally ill. And that breaks my heart. And my first husband passed away in 2015 from kidney failure. And I remember in 1998 when he went to the doctor and he said, "I feel puffy." And the doctor said, "You're just gaining weight." He said, No. This isn't weight. I feel puffy." And they dismissed him. And so he got he looked a little pudgy, like he wasn't overweight. He was puffy, literally. And he just got soft. That was the other word he used. "I'm feeling soft everywhere. It doesn't make sense." I was like, "Are you working out?" "Well, not as much as I could, I guess." So often they're putting it back on us. Oh, it's what you eat. Oh, it's how you move. But his kidneys before, like that was 17 years before he passed, were starting to give an early indication of a problem. And he died at 52. This is obscene. And so for every single person that's terminally ill that this person interviewed, to have a memory of a time when they tried to push for a better answer and didn't get the response that they were looking for, this is a problem. And our system is not set up for us. Our system is set up to protect doctors from liability lawsuits. They're beholden to insurance companies. They're beholden to their employers. Everything has become siloed. I went to see a neurologist with my dad who's got drop foot. And he could only address, he's like, "Oh, no, I don't talk about that kind. They sent you to the wrong one. I've got to get you to somebody else." Because he was a tremor doctor. He's a neurologist, but he's a tremor doctor. That's what he's allowed to talk about in his practice. So it took 3 months to get to the doctor who could talk about problems with the nerves. And now he did get him a physical therapist in the meantime, but everybody's so pigeonholed now for safety reasons in the system because the society just is not permitting doctors to be as intelligent or broadly focused as we would like them to. sometimes I want to get angry at the doctors, but I remind myself that they are not allowed to step out of their lane. They have more constraints on them than almost any other profession, I think, in our society right now. And I have empathy for them. I bet a lot of them are biohacking in their own lives and can't talk about it.
Yeah, you see a lot of vitriol towards doctors, especially like in the long COVID community, and I think that's not really the right response. I think people need to understand that the doctors are doing their best. They just don't always have all the answers, and also, like you said, and well, they have very limited time also because we have a shortage of doctors and they're overworked. And then, like you said, they have to be very careful about what they say because of there's always the threat of lawsuits, and yeah. So I that's why, again, I think we need to, if you have a chronic health condition and you're not getting any progress from seeing doctors, kind of need to widen your lens.
Can I say something about with doctors? I'm not a doctor. I'm a scientist, only a molecular biologist, not a doctor. But when we're trying to get our clinics live, we had obviously the name is Austin Biotech, or the company. So our first clinic was in Austin, Texas. The doctors who were going to do it, the OBG, the obstetrician surgeon, and the plastic surgeon that were doing the procedures, thought the science was amazing. They're like, this is fantastic. They were all over the place. They thought, but we'll never get it passed. We'll never get liability coverage. And so they were like, we can't do this, even though we could do this and we know it works. Because unfortunately, and as one of them said to me, you can do everything right, and it can still go wrong. And then you're the one holding the baby, but in trouble. You're the one that they're going to turn and blame, because we put doctors and scientists on a pedestal like we used to put priests on a pedestal 600 years ago. Before you used to go and have confession and a monk would give you a miracle. Now you go to the new temple, the temple of the hospital, and then that temple, we then have a doctor that will praise Jesus and help you out. I mean, in that sense, that's something it's difficult because, and I've learned the hard way, very, very much the hard way. And so we don't have, all our clinics are based in Mexico, and that's what we have to do. And even though in Mexico, they're just as good, believe they're absolutely just as good, but they don't have the ability to change things.
Yes, indeed. And Zack, did you want to comment on the mind-body discussion as well?
Absolutely. So, by the way, Sandy, you're doing a great one here. You're getting everyone talking, I just want to say. But so in terms of the mind body, one of the things, Dan, that we talk about in our group is we don't believe in just mind body being separate, mutually exclusive. They are blended together, and the thing that binds us together, that does not make us a machine. And let's go to some Terminator sort of analogies, where they start to develop a conscience, after a while they start to learn. And the thing that does that is emotion. And emotions are the things that determine the blend between mind and body. For instance, we could be watching someone die, and you would say you would have a positive reaction because that person ran over your brother in a car accident, right? But I would be devastated because that person pulled out my brother out of a fire. Now, we both have valid emotion. I'm not saying you'd be happy, but you might have a slight dopamine hit because it's like you feel a justification. I'd have a cortisol rush because I'd be, oh my God, that guy saved my bro and I couldn't help this guy. So they're emotional reactions. They're not mental reactions. They're not intellectual reactions. They're not physical reactions, but they have physical expressions that therefore cause certain illnesses. Now, the reason why I say that is what you were saying with scientists is you have this situation where we don't know what the limits are of the effects of these things are. We do know that we've seen this, and we have studies with our small sample sizes of people that are affected by emotion, and we focus solely on sexual function and reproduction because that is best bang for your buck of keeping you alive. And so when you look at that, it is a form of augmentation, but it's not physical augmentation. It's not putting a chip in your head. It's like saying, as Sandy was saying, I've motivated myself because I got a puppy. What was the puppy? It wasn't like a miniature pincher, was it? Like a stress dog or anything, was it?
No, it's multi-poo.
Okay, multi-poo. Okay, what's a multi-poo?
It's a Maltese poodle mix. He looks like he's really cute.
Okay, so a multi-poo. Okay, you could call it peas as well, I suppose. Okay, so so you have a multi-poo. So that dog makes you feel good, right? So it gives you purpose in life. And very often when people die when they get older, specifically when they get older, is because they lose a sense of purpose and meaning to their lives. And that manifests itself in a physical way, and that is emotional. It is not mental. It's not logical, because that makes no total logical sense. Why should I even give a damn if that guy died? Because he'd already saved my brother. So who cares? Why should you care? Or why should you care if he died? Because he'd already killed your brother. It doesn't make any logical sense, but emotionally it does. And that is where I think people are not looking at this, because, as we say, we call it Freudenspanner, and it's that emotional aspect that makes us human, or transhuman, or whatever human, cishuman, that kind of thing. So that sort of thing, and I think there is something. And back to that, there are other things like vibrations, breathing, electrical charge. So each millivolt, 76 millivolts of energy go through a nerve at every pulse. So it would make sense that there is an electrical charge. There is the whole electromagnetic spectrum that has an effect. How we interpret that is where things start to get a bit like hocus pocus. I'm selling you snake oil. This bottle will save your life, but no, it doesn't do that. And the other thing with breathing is oxygen, again, helps you heal. That's why when people have tendon injuries, it's very hard to heal because there's no blood flow to the tendons. And then the third part is the vibrations you're talking about, where obviously when you go to absolute zero, nothing vibrates. Bang, period. So any form of vibration afterwards is something, but how you again interpret these three things are very difficult to do. So that's why we have unfortunately siloed ourselves into sexual function and reproduction, sure, and aesthetic maintenance, which is skin, but that's quite a large bang for your buck. That's a pretty good bang, and it's like, that's pretty much most of the endocrine system. So that's as good as we can get it. So I just wanted to comment that, because it's when you hack that, it's understanding the hacking. And likewise, when you're talking about doctors who don't listen to you or don't understand, one of our co-founders, she went to hospital and they were checking out, she discovered that she had asthma, but when they checked her out originally, they said, "Oh, you're fine." They did a VO2 max test on her. She's 5'2". She's 105 pounds, and they just said, "You're just a standard, 40-year-old woman." But they didn't realize that she used to be a former commercial deep sea diver, so that had oversized lungs. So because they hadn't asked that question, they didn't know that actually her performance was way below where she should be. Because when you look at this, she looks like a normal woman. The fact she can hold her breath underwater for 6 minutes is like incredible, but you wouldn't know that. So they didn't. Those are questions that doctors, again, like you mentioned, Sandy, don't have time to do, because they just have to make judgment calls and triage you at that moment in time. And that's where biohacking comes in, because if you come in aware, like she's a molecular biologist too, so she can say, well, actually, those figures are wrong. My lungs are like 4.7 liters or whatever they were. So then they went, and then they looked deeper, they discovered the problem. So by being a biohacker, or by being someone who is bio-aware, or bio-libertarian, maybe we should call ourselves. So we take that point, and so when we go to a specialist or professional, we have the ability to offer more information in a way that someone who is ignorant doesn't work. I just saw bio-individualist. Yeah, we could be that bio-team player. There you go. BTP. Anyway, that's my point on that.
All right, thank you, Zach. And Rudy Hoffman says, I think I like this Zach person trying to tease out the emotional component of our experience. Rudy also notes that with regard to doctors, they tend to want to work from established science rather than anecdotal stories. So they need a large volume of information about a particular condition before they can draw any generalizations or make any recommendations about it. But sometimes individuals experience symptoms that are quite weird and unusual and singular. And that is where perhaps some different approaches may yield better results. Rudy also writes he has had no less than 3 so-called anti-aging doctors, none of whom were very credible in his view. So there is this caveat emptor concern as well, and people need to be careful about making sure that the advice that they get or the practices they undertake are actually relevant to their own situations and will alleviate their symptoms. Now, Jason had a few questions. I think one of the questions was kind of answered in the course of our conversation. Do you ever get people arguing about what qualifies as biohacking? Well, that's about a third of our chat right now on YouTube. And he also wonders, are there some who think that supplements and similar kinds of approaches don't count as biohacking? And it seems that that is a common misconception that some people have. One of the other questions was, would Inspector Gadget and Rick Sanchez be considered biohackers? So there's this whole spectrum. On the one hand, there are people who only pursue lifestyle or supplements. And on the other hand, there are people who are very inclined to use, let's say, gadgets for lack of a better term, but they're more focused on the interaction between man and machine and what that could bring about in terms of health or performance. And this does seem to be a very broad spectrum. And I wonder, for the Biohacker Expo, Sandy, would you say that people from all over that spectrum in terms of their approaches are going to be represented there?
Yes, but I want to give a perspective that I think will help clarify why I don't focus on it being a specific thing you do to your body. Surgery would be considered a biohack. Antibiotics, a pacemaker for the heart. You know, we talk about Neuralink. We've got the first human trial for that this week with a brain implant, but a pacemaker is the exact same kind of a thing that's been around for decades. And, my grandfather had 6 artificial hips. What is biohacking? We've been going into our biology to make adjustments for 100 years or more. So that's not the definition of biohacking. That's not what the movement is about. The movement is about self-optimization. The movement is about a healthy, long life, health, with the emphasis on healthy. Does that help?
I think so.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. It's and again, it's sort of, there's sort of an ethos to it I just looked it up here, and they say do it yourself. Yeah, taking your own initiative, and optimizing things instead of the conventional medical system, which is just focused on treating diseases that Yep.
And I think the conventional system has effectively evolved to treat symptoms. And I welcome debate on that, but if what we're managing is symptoms, then we end up like my grandmother, who spent 10 years dying. And I don't want to live that way. I don't want to die for 10 years. And
in some cases,
yeah,
that's good business, though. That's good business.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So every human being is worth $9.5 million, I think, standard US value. So that equates to $900,000 a year. So let's say the last 15 years of your life, that's $4.5 million, of business of selling you drugs. I mean, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying it is. And it becomes you look at like something like the when they have have you seen that movie Bad Water or Dark Water about the Teflon in West Virginia? And so all of the DuPont family, they did all of the DuPont companies and all the connected companies with that, they made Teflon, and all the water went into, all the off run from Teflon went into the water, destroyed a lot of people's mental health. Having lived a very brief period in that area, um, that in that area, that I always thought there was something wrong with the water because there's so many mad people. And then I came across this story, which I think was now made into a movie. And when you think about it, the people that are making billions of dollars, that DuPont family, they all live in that area. They still drink the same water. So in many ways, they're still damaging themselves. They just don't realize it because they think they have a NIMBY, not in my backyard kind of thing. Oh, I'm fine. I'm going to be okay. But you don't know. So I think that's something, as understanding is changing a mindset, which is not as easy as it sounds. But we're obviously part of that movement, or it's how it is.
Well, I think water filtration is a biohack. And I bet the DuPont family was filtering their water.
Yeah.
Without getting into specific details, they probably weren't in the way that you think they were, because there's different ways to filter that water, where it be, and also things like hormones in the water that you get from female products that emasculate men or reducing fertility. Well, do you think with a bit of a reverse osmosis and a little bit of carbon, it doesn't work? You have to distill it at a certain temperature, and I guarantee you that most people don't distill their water. Guaranteed, they don't do it.
All right, so let us take some more questions from our panel. Let's go to Art Ramon.
Yeah, back between 2012 and 2017, I was having a lot of cognitive issues, and I was having, just issues with articulation. I lost a ton of vocabulary, and I lost my two canines, and didn't know what was wrong. So I was just trying all sorts of stuff, lots of B12 shots, nootropics, racetam. Started learning sign language to get the brain working, lots of energy drinks. And what it ended up being was a severe vitamin D deficiency. So, I've dealt with, the cognitive issues. And once I started taking the prescription grade vitamin D, the racetam quit working. It just had like no effect. And I didn't need as much energy drink. So my vision seemed to get sharper. And that was pretty good for a while until COVID happened. And now I have COVID long haul, and I've got a lot of the typical symptoms of like chronic fatigue, muscle fatigue. My fitness level has dropped severely. It's very difficult to get my fitness level up. If I take a break, like a week or two from exercising, it's like I took a year off of exercising. And, the brain fog, I still have the brain fog. What I found that works for that's kind of a treatment, not a cure. Hyperbaric oxygen therapy has helped a lot. It's given me a lot more energy to get things done. Not so much with the brain fog, which kind of sucks. I don't know why it's not helping me think there. Also, I've been cold plunging. That helps. It really shocks the body and gets your mind working. And bupropion. I started taking bupropion very early on when I had long COVID. And I told the doctor, I was like, I can't think. So he gave me some bupropion, and that's been helpful also. Also did energy drinks for a while, but I quit doing energy drinks. There's lots of coffee now. So yeah, I've had two issues now with like a cognitive hit to me, and overcoming has been difficult, but I haven't given up. And yeah, it's been difficult. One thing that I can't figure out is when I lost vocabulary, I remember specifically not being able to recall the word, but knowing the definition of the word and asking people, what is this word? And I would describe the word, and no one seemed to know it. And eventually, I forgot the definition of the word. Now, vocabulary is gone from my head, but I'm thinking I should have heard these words by now. Somebody would have said them. I would have read them. So it's almost like a Mandela effect. Like, so that vocabulary existed in an alternate universe 2012 happened. And I shifted to a new universe where those words just don't exist. So, and when I was having that vitamin D deficiency, I was having a lot of, what do you call it, um, deja vu. Lots of deja vu. All the time. Things would change in front of me. And yeah, it was very, very weird time. Yeah, HBOT, cold plunging so far is my best treatment. I'm always looking for new treatments for long COVID. But really, one of the best things that got me through like year 2021 was just massive amounts of coffee. I think I'm gonna kill that virus with caffeine, So I just drank massive amounts of coffee, and that helped me get through the workday, but I wasn't drained the rest of the day. So long COVID, what I've already mentioned 2 treatments that I use. Anything else that you think might help you?
Have you tried red light?
I have.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does that not make the list of things that for you?
I didn't feel any effect from it.
Okay. I don't use it personally because I have had melanoma and squamous cell, and it is uncertain at this time whether or not light therapy helps or hurts the propensity to get skin cancer, and so I don't personally do it. I have a question for you though, because the word finding is the left side of the brain, and the right side has more of an emphasis on presence. So the left side is sequential. Sentence structure was a challenge for me when I was sick, and then I was deeply inspired by the work of Jill Bolte Taylor. Have you heard of her?
No.
She did one of the most popular TED Talks of all time in 2008, where it's called My Stroke of Insight. And she was a neuroanatomist who had a stroke in her left hemisphere. And she observed this stroke from the perspective of a neuroanatomist. And so she was unable to call for help. She was unable to put words together. And then she described this beautiful state of altered consciousness that she entered when she was in that state, and how she knew she had to get help, but it was almost like a psychedelic trip that she was experiencing, while she recognized fully inside of herself as a neuroanatomist that she was in deep trouble and needed help fast. She managed to get to a phone, and her incoherence with whoever she called managed to get her help. And so it took her, my understanding is it took several years for her to be verbal again at all. And that was all before 2008, when she gave that talk. After her TED Talk, people were begging her to explain how she got herself back. And that's when I learned about the 4 quadrants of the brain and what they do. And so when I lost the word finding, I would describe certain states as buffering, like that pinwheel on your Mac, or you're watching Netflix and it starts to buffer. I would find myself in my kitchen. I'm going about cooking, doing whatever. And I'll go, oh, I've been standing here a little while. I'd be in the shower, and I would just seconds would go by and I haven't done anything. I would just be in this hover state. And when I read her book, Whole Brain Living, I recognized that those were states of deep presence. So when you describe it like an altered state, I feel like that's what we're tapping into when we tap into mindfulness and presence, and that there's a part of the brain that allows us to go deep into the present moment, because the past and the future are all on the left side of the brain. And that's where anxiety and depression live. And so if you're worried about the past, you tend to have depressive symptoms. And if you're worried about the future, you tend to have anxiety. In the present moment, when we train for this, I trained for this for years, trying to live in the now, couldn't get there. And then suddenly I couldn't get out of the now. And so I recognized, back to Mind Over Matter, I recognized that I had an opportunity to redefine my life from the present moment. And that if I was going to rebuild my brain, it would be from presence, and what a gift that would be. And so that's how I worked through that. I also, in this concept of mind and body, want to point out that there are loads of studies on the placebo effect and the nocebo effect and how the body responds. With regards to something Zack said, that there's so many cases of broken heart syndrome leading to death when old people die 20 minutes apart. Emotions can cause us to die. And so it's important to know that it is well documented that the mind can have it. I think with Prozac, it took 50 studies to get 2 that demonstrated a modest improvement over placebo. And so these are things to consider when we believe we will feel better. We often do. I forget your question.
Just other treatments for long COVID.
So I think the most important thing to consider is whether or not there's anything in your lifestyle that could contribute to inflammation. And so that could be the types of foods you're eating, whether or not you're filtering your water. Are you eating from plastic containers? Are you getting a Starbucks cup? What's your exposure to endocrine disruptors? There are more things than we can wrap our heads around that can contribute to inflammation. And if, almost like testing for food allergies, if you could remove certain things from your diet. So if it's a Starbucks cup you drink out of every day, switching to a mug and seeing how that impacts your physiology. But in terms of biohacks, the things that reduce inflammation, I would say acupuncture, microcurrent. There are all kinds of things you could try. I don't know if you've tried either one of those. A sound bath, anything a yoga nidra, anything that can cause your nervous system to completely relax. They say an hour in yoga nidra is equivalent to 4 hours of deep sleep. I would ask how you're sleeping, and if you could biohack your way to a better night's sleep, because then that will help your brain release the fluid that will help with the brain fog. How do you sleep?
Usually get like 7 to 12 hours of sleep.
Do you track the quality?
No, I don't.
That's where I would start, because if you're sleeping 12, it indicates you might not be getting the oxygen you need at night, and that your body's trying to make up for that. And so you might not be entering the stages of deep sleep for long enough to have the impact you need with 7 or 8 hours of sleep. 12 is
actually, I did discover I was having a low oxygen issue. I got a oximeter that I can wear 24/7, and my oxygen levels were going as far down as 70% at night. And I told my doctor that. He gave me albuterol. So I take albuterol, but it only lasts like 6 hours. So I'm always taking the albuterol to keep my oxygen levels from getting below 80. And I think that might have helped some with, fatigue, not getting a good night's sleep.
I hate to jump in on this, but sounds like you need a sleep study.
Oh, I've been trying to get one. They keep.
I got a sleep study during long COVID. It took about 6 months to get it, but what happened was I developed pretty severe limb movement and I guess minor restless legs, and that's what I learned from the sleep study. Ultimately, I think improving my vitamin D and iron helped with that. But yeah, there's anything where your oxygen is going low at night is really bad. That sounds like, obstructive sleep apnea, which is actually very common.
It seems it's not obstructive. Yeah. What I noticed is I just breathe very shallow.
Yeah.
And I had my nose fixed. I had a deviated septum, and that was kind of causing problems. But now that I can breathe well, it just seems that I just shallow breathe at times, and that causes the low oxygen levels.
Well,
sometimes even sitting too long causes the oxygen levels to drop because I'm not moving around. I have to move around to get the heart beating, to get blood flowing, and maintain my oxygen levels. So
do some boxing, fighting.
I have a suggestion for breathing. I have 2 suggestions for improving breathing. One is the Wim Hof breathing method, so that you can train for breath holds, because it's those moments of hypoxia that your body learns how to adapt. So that's the first thing. You can find simple YouTube videos for that. And the other is a device called the AeroFit. That is a breathing apparatus where you strengthen your lungs. And so if you think that your issue is shallow breathing at night, perhaps your lungs need to be exercised. And you can do that. Like if you're too tired, this is my whole issue with, just work out more and then you'll feel better. Obviously, that's not the answer for everybody. Some people, especially with long COVID, can't do that kind of exercise. I applaud the discipline, Gennady, that you had to measure and stay within a range, because that is the only way you can do it through exercise. But you can use a breathing device where it provides resistance for your inhale and your exhale to strengthen your lungs in an isolated way. You do it for 5 minutes, and that gets directly to the exact need that you have to develop. And so again, I consider that to be a biohack.
Yeah. Well, I do hike, and I am just breathing heavily. And one thing I notice is that, my muscles fatigue quickly, but also my heart rate. I mean, I'm just vigorously hiking, and my heart rate's around 109. And when I finally can't take it, my muscles are burning, I take a break, and my heart rate shoots up to 140, which is where it should have been. And then it slowly drops down to 130. And again, I kind of usually wait till it gets down to 110 and then continue. So it's like my heart is not beating fast enough for the activity level that I'm doing. So, and I've noticed, I tell this to my doctor and nothing, he doesn't know anything, but there's these 2 doctors on YouTube, I think they're Australian, and everything they describe, it's like it is happening to me. And they're saying Ivermectin helps with something about overproduction of antigens, and maybe that's causing the inflammation.
So on that point, have you ever used one of these? Have you used one of these?
Yeah, actually, I took a pulmonary function test, and is that what that is?
No, you heard.
Okay, it's a trainer.
Yeah, it's a trainer,
Okay.
right? And so you just do that, right? I mean, you can train it different ways. This is a 2.5 liter one or something, but whatever it is, so you can train it up. So you can use that to train your diaphragm. What you're doing is your autonomic system is forgetting how to breathe. And I know this, from personal experience, I know what I'm talking about. And it is absolutely, you're forgetting how to breathe. And what happens is you have to train yourself. Like, this is where the whole difference between conscious and subconscious come in. And again, we can be hours on this. I'd have to take you offline on it. But it fundamentally, when I had COVID, they gave this to me in the hospital. And I shot it out and blew it out. And I was like, bloody hell. And I was like, they were like, your breathing exercises. But I had breathing functions. And the other thing is, when people panic, or people start to get stressed, and panic comes in many ways. So when I was in the ICU, the person next to me, he died, and he was very fit, very, very healthy. And it's because he was panicking with the breathing. Now, yes, there are some physiological effects of uptake of oxygen, but what you're talking about is not physiological effects of uptake of oxygen. What you're talking about is that you're exercising at 109, then your body stops, and then it goes up to 140. Well, the reason why we go up to 140, that pulse, is because you're not enough oxygen is going through your system. So either the brain is spoofing itself, saying it needs to do that, and actually you've got plenty of oxygen in your system. I don't know what your oxygenation levels are, or it's actually. Do you have the answer to that?
I wearing the oximeter, my oxygen levels were normal. They were like 95. So, and that's one of the things I wasn't sure of. And when I started wearing that, I was, 95. And then all of a sudden I'm continuing. And now my heart rate won't even go up above 100. It's like 66 maxed out. And yeah, it right. Should be in the 130s. And okay. It's at 66.
Okay. So also now you're doing, this is stuff that we do with our patients, exactly this kind of stuff. So if you have, do you do sprint training?
No. My knees are shot. Well, my knees and hips are both bad.
Okay, so there are ways and means of doing sprint training without actually sprinting, if that makes sense. So you have to do like a max anaerobic exercise that is very stressful on the body, and it forces your body to work without oxygen.
If I may, when I had those symptoms, I was diagnosed with POTS. I'm not saying you have POTS. I don't even remember what it stands for. But the opposite advice to give for POTS is what Zack just said. And it's really important to know when you're stressing the nervous system and when you're not. So I maybe find a doctor who is familiar with that. Do you have any dizziness? Like, I can't diagnose you. I don't know. But these are just related things.
No dizziness. No.
When I was doing, because all of the advice to feeling better, a high intensity interval training, intermittent fasting, keto diet, I was doing all of it to feel better. And after exercise, my heart rate would go up, which is a definite sign of poor health. And so the goal now, I don't have that issue at all because I've healed the inflammation. There's something about what's going on when you talk about the brain fog and the chronic symptoms that suggests chronic inflammation, bringing that down in some way, training the breath, perhaps the heart math technique to train the heart to beat in a smooth pattern. All of this can regulate the nervous system and bring you back into a state of balance before you push again. I wouldn't do intense training with those kind of results.
Okay. Now, ivermectin. These Australian doctors were saying that ivermectin helps with some people who have a dysfunctional immune system, where they overproduce these antigens and causes problems. Have you heard anything about that?
My opinion about ivermectin is that I understand that it's designed to treat parasites. And I know that the body is a host to all kinds of organisms, parasites, fungus, bacteria, etc. It's possible that there could be a fungus, bacterial, or parasitic reason for your symptoms. And perhaps that is a way to address it, but I wouldn't take a drug like that without knowing. I would get tested for those things. That's what biohackers do. Biohackers get tested for those things and then take action.
I just want to note a fun fact here about ivermectin, which is that a lot of the studies which purported that ivermectin worked for COVID were actually done in countries that have a very high level of parasite infection. So there's actually a very good blog post on a blog some of our listeners might know, Astrocodex 10, all about ivermectin. And long story short, it doesn't work for COVID, but it does work for parasites. And a lot of people have, especially in some of the mid-latitude or equatorial latitude countries, more tropical countries, that a lot of people have undiagnosed parasitic infection. Anyway.
Yes,
I mean,
very
we all have
interesting.
parasites, right? So it's possible it could help anyone with anything if they just have a slightly higher imbalance of parasites. It's like when you go vegan, you feel better. When you go carnivore, you feel better. Anything that shifts your body dramatically for 2 weeks causes a response. When you put yourself in an ice bath, you feel better, right? Any one of these things, if it's different from your norm, causes a response that can help you feel better. And I don't doubt all the people who said they got better because they took ivermectin, but I don't know that that means that it's because it was perfectly designed for COVID. It could be correlated.
Yeah, they mentioned that these people who respond to it is something to do with a dysfunctional immune system. So antigens, whatever, I don't even know what the antigens are, but okay, thank you.
Yes, so I've listed this article that Dan had mentioned from Astral Codex 10. You can find this deep dive into the studies on ivermectin. And Dan also made a comment that just believing that you can get better is essential. I think if it is an autonomic nervous system dysfunction, that could help. Just essentially gradually getting to the point where you can perform more of your typical activities in a way that feels comfortable for you may be a path out of long COVID. Not right away, of course. It may take months or even years, but it can definitely help.
Gennady, while we're on this train of trying to help art, I would just say, like, look at how you've, instead of just focusing on the heart rate number, look at how you feel. Do you feel stressed? Do you feel fatigued?
Yeah, I feel like I'm dying. I feel like I'm doing a full-on sprint for 2 miles. That's what it feels like, and I'm just doing a vigorous hike. So
and then maybe you need to maybe you're pushing yourself too hard, and because I'm a believer in graded exercise for long COVID, which is, it's very controversial. And one of the issues with it is you have to go very, very slow. Otherwise, you're overstressed your system. And anyway, that's what I would say. That's basically what I would say. Look at don't over obsess on the numbers so much, and think more about how you feel. That would be my advice. But anyway,
I mean, I would personally walk for 2 minutes and then measure and see if my heart rate goes up. And then if it does, I would slow it down. I would act personally, I would continuously wear, right, the heart rate monitor, and I would check it. And every time it would go up, I would bring it down. I actually do a form of training where the training for me is to bring my heart rate down. And so I'll exercise until I get to 120, 140 beats per minute, and then deliberately slow it down to 80. And sometimes that means lying down. So I do it on a rebounder, and then I lie down and see how quickly I can bring my heart rate down, because I think that there's more value in how quickly we can lower our heart rate than how long we can keep it elevated.
The definition of fitness is how quickly you can go from baseline to max and back again. It's not your actual baseline itself. So some people have a resting pulse of 70 and some people have a resting pulse of 45, but that doesn't make you inherently fit. Yes, on average, someone with a lower pulse rate is going to be fitter, but the ability to go to your max. Now, so you're age 52, right? So they say you should only go to a certain number. I can't remember what the number is, but I mean, that's rubbish. I mean, that's like, because you might have a heart that allows you to go much faster than that or higher. Or you might have that ability. You don't know. So the concept of feeling, as Dan was saying, is very important. It's got to, your body, and that's the thing with biohacking, is knowing thyself, so you can maximize that out. So in other words, understanding that ability to control what we consider to be something that's subconscious, breathing, heart rate, blood pressure. I mean, there's times when I've heard some people go on and they're screaming and shouting, and I think it was a great analogy. I think it was Muhammad Ali, I think, was doing one where he was screaming and shouting, and then they took his blood pressure. And it was like really normal. But what was interesting about it was his blood pressure went really high, and then he had the ability to control it down. Now, he's not actually that exceptional in that area. A lot of people have this ability. They just don't realize they have this ability. And so you have to, once you know you can do it, you're like, hey, man, I can do this. What a great, I could. So you're screaming and shouting, and everyone's, my God, the guy's falling apart, and your pulse rate's 50. And you're just, hey, it's fine. And in actual fact, you're stressing everyone else out, maybe, but it's for you, it's fine. And that is, and so your breathing issues could be a number of things. And I think what Sandy's saying is very true. Is you've got to run the test, and just looking at your pulse rate is biological whack-a-mole. Oh, my pulse rate's high, I've got to let my pulse rate down. Well, that doesn't mean shit. What you've actually got to do is say, hey, my pulse rate's high. Why is my pulse rate high? What is causing that pulse rate to go high? Is there something else? Am I eating some food that I'm having a reaction to in my gut biome that's raising my pulse rate because it accidentally produces cortisol in my gut, and so therefore I'm having this, I don't know, M&M, and M&Ms have a result that causes me to have cortisol. I don't know. That's why we do those tests of genetics, gut biome, bone density, and blood work. We should probably throw in a brain scan at some point when we get past to that eventuality, but we're going to do that, and then you can overlap those areas. So you're only giving yourself half the information. There was a great ad that was done in the UK in about 25-30 years ago, and there's this picture of this guy running, and you see he's a black guy and he's running down the street in like a hoodie, and then you see a policeman chasing him behind, and they say, look at this picture, and you see it, and you just assume he's chasing some sort of ghetto criminal. And then when they pan out the picture, you see actually they're chasing a criminal, and he's the undercover cop who's chasing this guy. So it's a perspective, and you've got to have all the information around to get that perspective. And that's why testing and understanding as much testing as you can is important, because without information, I mean, when we have our patients, we test for 9 months after the procedure. So we get all the information, and things have come up that we had no idea existed. We think we knew the answer. We didn't know half the answers. And now we're getting more and more answers along. So you've always got to get that ability to information, because you're only giving yourself half the information. Why is your heart rate going up to 140? I mean, it could be some other reason. It could be some pain in your toe, and your brain is going, oh, it hurts. And then you're getting stressed and you're producing adrenaline. You just don't know. You just don't know.
Yeah, well, it's the muscles are burning. I mean, that's one of the conditions is my muscles fatigue quickly, and if my legs are fatigued and I keep pushing, well, they're just burning. So,
but that's a symptom of inflammation, which you can take care of. I will add. I want to take some other questions too, but I will add that in that moment, in the elevated heart rate, the one technique that works for me every time is breathe in for 4 seconds and hum the breath out. So that vibration in your chest will soothe that issue immediately. And so, if you are having chest pains and we're at risk of having a heart attack, that's not going to resolve the issue. But if you're just having a nervous system issue and you're out on that trail in the moment, I encourage you to breathe in for 4 seconds and then hum the breath out for 4 seconds and repeat until you feel better. I promise you will feel better.
Okay, I'll try it.
All right, so let us indeed move on to some other questions. Daniel Tweet, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear about the Biohack conference. One of my favorite experiences doing college radio back in the 90s was getting to meet and interview Dr. Bob Beck on multiple occasions. And he has the maybe not so famous as it should be, the Beck protocol. You can Google it. It's basically a very non-invasive set of 4 therapies involving microcurrent pulsation on the brachial artery in the wrist there, and then also drinking oxygenated water, which you can watch your blood oxygen concentration just go through the roof just in seconds of drinking water that's had ozone bubbled through it. Colloidal silver can help. You don't want to overdo it on that. There's that argiosis, gray lady syndrome that you can get. And then the final thing was a pulsing of your lymph points, because your lymph actually holds a lot of toxins and pathogens, and the blood treatment pulsing will not address the lymph. So you need to take a hand wound magnet that you can make and pulse it through a strobe light, which incidentally, that's one of the patents that Dr. Bob Beck had, was for the strobe light. Just an amazing guy. It's too bad that he's no longer with us. But yeah, he was saying, take back your power, do it yourself. And I love that there's a conference for this. Is this the first one, by the way?
It is my first one, yeah.
Wow. I hope it really goes, because we're all biochemically unique, and these solutions have to be unique. And, just an attitude of gratitude sounds kind of cliched, but that's a very healing thing to have. And I just kind of wonder, the AMA sponsored this guy, Abraham Flexer, back in, I think, 1910 to go around and standardize all the medical education in the country. And they ended up throwing out everything that was not basically petrochemical based, treating the symptoms, managing symptoms with petrochemical derived pharmaceuticals, which, oh, what a coincidence. It was like big oil behind most of that pharmaceutical stuff. But I think that was an incredible, setback to medical wellness, health. My friend went to Thailand, lived there for 10 years, and she said, "Oh my God, you wouldn't believe it. There's people selling just any kind of, treatment you could think of just on the sidewalk. It's cheap. We don't want to go overboard to the quackery side of things. But, then again, the AMA has said that anything in terms of cancer treatment that's not radiation, surgery, and chemo is quackery. So they, by definition, said anything that's not those three things is quackery. So I think we do need to start with the least invasive thing. Do no greater harm is the Hippocratic Oath. Anyway, there's a question in there somewhere. But what kind of fungus was diagnosed in your brain? I guess mold and fungus are the same thing. And how do you think that you picked that up?
I don't remember the names of the mycotoxins, as they're called, and I picked it up in my living environment. I called Florida the moist state.
Oh.
And it's just prevalent here. It's everywhere. It takes a very concerted effort in Florida to avoid it.
Did you do a microcurrent therapy? I've heard you mention that.
I did. Yeah, I used the Healy, and that was amazing in terms of results for me.
Yeah, I know Bob Beck said one of the earliest treatments for breast cancer in the Sears catalog, you get these electrified needles that would go in the breast. And I mean, maybe that sounds like quackery now, but basically the AMA just threw out anything that was electromedicine, homeopathy, naturopathy, anything that didn't, fit the big money model. So, yeah, I hope these conferences really grow. And is there a big vendor room where people will be selling DIY kind of biohack stuff?
Yeah, we have about 60 vendors, over 100 booths.
Wow. Well, I hope the AMA doesn't rate it. But I guess it's okay to experiment on yourself. That's the loophole in the law. If you don't sell a medical device that's unapproved.
Well, I don't think anything at the event is anything that's not approved for use in the United States. So there's a gray area here. Like, supplements are not regulated by the FDA, right? So that's an area where things are allowed. And a lot of the devices that are approved are even FDA certified as helpful for pain. One of the things that the biohacking community runs into is this issue with money in the FDA. And so a lot of people want to say that they're not going to do anything that's not double-blind, clinical trial certified, FDA approved, right? Well, vitamin C isn't. A lot of people still take vitamin C. And so every single person, I suspect, who says they won't do that, they won't do anything that's not FDA approved, is actually doing something that is not FDA approved. They just don't realize that qualifies as a thing. And so it's on a spectrum of considerations. And so what some companies are doing, like red light is approved for treatment of pain with neuropathy. Might help with blood flow too. So biohacking is almost like an off-label approach. It goes back to what I said about doctors are biohacking. They're accessing our biology through drugs and scalpels to change our physiological state. So where on the spectrum, and when things are approved or not for cancer treatment by the AMA, essentially what they're saying is, if you stay in this lane, we have lawyers who will protect you. If you leave this lane, we can't help you.
It kind of reminds me of, Tesla had to start their own insurance company because since the 1/3 of the car is this giant one-piece aluminum frame, the car is basically totaled, if you get in an accident. So, I'm getting an emergency alert here, probably about the flooding and the wind here, but I'll mute.
Interesting. All right. Thank you to Daniel. And we have a few questions about the Biohacker Expo that I want to address. First of all, Ellen Crowley states that the $75 streaming ticket to the expo seems interesting. Can you shed some light on that option?
We'll be live streaming the main stage during the event and taking recordings from the other stages. And so after the event, the recordings will be posted and all of it will be available for 30 days following the event.
All right, very good. And he also wonders, could you tell us something about the speakers on the main stage? So you have over 60 speakers listed on the website. Will all of them be on the main stage at some point, or will only some?
Only some. People like Gary Brecka, Misha Tate, Chris Palmer, William Shatner. Some of these people will be on the main stage. Robert Lufkin. I think even Zack Varkaris might make his way to the main stage. So it's varied, but yeah, I would just say if you go onto the website and you click on the schedule, you can sort by room. If you're curious as to what would be live streamed, that would be the best way to sort by the main stage.
Very good. And anybody who is interested in more details about who is on the main stage can find them on the website at biohackerexpo.com. And Zack Varkaris also recommends watching a film on Amazon Prime called Surviving Supercons. So could you perhaps talk about that briefly?
Okay. Do you want to talk about it?
Well, you want to talk about it or you want me to talk about it?
Sandy.
Okay, so I mentioned earlier I used to run Comic-Cons. There was a documentary made about me running my last SuperCon in 2018 with my ex-husband. And it was shot in Fort Lauderdale. We anticipated some security issues, so we hired a crew to follow us with cameras. And then it was so exciting that the person who led that crew decided to turn it into a documentary following.
All right. Well, check it out. It's on Amazon Prime. Dan, did you want to comment on it?
No, this is a whole nother side of her backstory. I didn't know. It's interest that I didn't know about. It's interesting. Did a lot of your experience, help you get all of these big name speakers for your first biohacking conference?
I mean, I would say that running events now has been encoded onto my DNA, and it's just like it's a reflex now for me. It feels. It took a while though, because I couldn't put together an event when I was sick. So being able to do this now is a real testament to how much I've healed. But know that the documentary was before mold, and that after mold, I rebuilt my life on presence. And so you'll see a very, very angry and frustrated version of me that doesn't surface as often anymore.
Huh, okay. Interesting. Yeah.
Indeed.
Oh,
and We do have a question that I think is relevant from Snakes, who wonders, is there a benefit to mindfulness? How practical is it? And by practical, he means the chances of it having a satisfying effect exactly when needed. Could it be a solution to various issues, be they physical or mental, or the intersection between them? Could it help in long COVID, for instance?
Well, Dan Harris says that mindfulness makes you 10% happier. And I would rather stack a bunch of things that add 10% and then get 30% happier. I think that's maybe why biohacking is important to me. Maybe mindfulness isn't, maybe 10% isn't enough for you. Maybe it is. But there are studies that show that it actually changes the level of white matter in the brain. And so it improves the interconnectivity of the brain. And that does help us in those moments. So when we practice being present, we're able to access this point of non-judgment and respond differently in our lives. But in all fairness, I will tell you that I never achieved anything close when I was trying for a decade. It took a brain injury for me to actually feel presence. And that's no judgment for anyone who tries mindfulness and it doesn't work, because it didn't work for me for 10 years.
All right, thank you for that answer. And Adrian Benavides wonders, is there a benefit in sleeping in hyperbaric oxygen chambers for any sort of health improvement? Have you seen any studies to that effect or any experiences?
Well, the recommended protocol is typically 90 minutes, 5 times a week with 2 days off. I have not seen a recommendation that someone would sleep in one overnight. I think that also it's important to be taking antioxidants if you're doing a lot of oxygen therapy. Glutathione can be a good antioxidant to counteract some of the effects of the oxygen. Too much oxygen can be bad for the brain. And so even at a 2.0 rating for too long of a period of time can cause problems in the brain. When I saw a doctor about it, he suggested I get a mild chamber and use it at home, because a little bit is sometimes better than a lot with oxygen.
All right, thank you, Sandy. And we have about 2 minutes left in our salon for today. So I wanted to ask you if you have any additional comments about the Biohacker Expo that you want to share with the audience, as well as any points that you think are important to make to conclude this conversation.
I just want to let everyone know that if you want to feel better, you can. There's something out there that can help you feel better. And to keep looking and searching and asking questions until you figure out what that is for you. And we're going to be talking about that at the expo. And I'm basically now dedicating my life to that because I've healed. If you want to reach out to me, anyone, just feel free to email me. My email's on the website.
All right. Yes, I think Sandy is an extremely valuable source for information, not just in her own situation, but information from throughout the biohacking community about approaches that are out there that could help people with various conditions. But as always, of course, use your own knowledge of yourself and your own situation and couple that with medical advice to the extent that it can help. I have found it to be quite helpful for my situation for long COVID to go through the conventional medical system. And I had a concierge physician, and I had every non-invasive cardiac diagnostic that I could get done. And finally, when my cardiac MRI came back clean, it offered me the reassurance that I could manage this condition, that I could improve through the graded exercise approach. So it is essentially a form of bio-libertarianism or bio-individualism, as some people have characterized it. But Sandy, we are quite quite pleased that you were able to join us for this multifaceted conversation, a lot of both general ideas and some very practical recommendations. Please go to biohackerexpo.com if you're interested in either attending in Miami in person or watching the live stream. And I will be there in Miami if you want to converse about transhumanism or life extension. And of course, Zack will be there as well. So I hope that we can all stay in good health until then, and for the much longer term future, live long and prosper.